remind members, as the meeting is in public session, or all meetings are recorded, so if members would remind members to turn off all electronic devices. In terms of today's business, the committee will receive 2 briefings today. First, we will hear from Northern Ireland Water on the PC15 draft determination, and then the Department will brief us on the issue of enforcement cameras at bus lanes. Members should note that there are 2 pieces of subordinate legislation to consider in relation to this briefing. And finally, members, we will consider the forward work programme for the upcoming committee stage of the off-street parking. With 2 apologies so far, 3 apologies, David McNary, John Dallett and Stephen Mitray.
No others received.
No others received, okay. In terms of the Chairman's business, just to update the members that there's a Translink seminar which took place on Monday, which I attended, and also then on last night there was a Belfast Rapid Transport seminar which took place last night here, that was hosted by the Northern Ireland Business Trust.
Assembly Business Trust.
Sorry, Northern Ireland Assembly Business Trust. Agenda item number 3 is the draft minutes of the meeting on the 8th of October. Can I refer members to page 6 of their for the minutes of the committee meeting on the 8th of October. Sorry. Can I ask members if they agree with the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Agenda item 4, correspondence. Can I refer members to correspondence on page 12 of their main pack and then page 2 of their table pack. Unless there's any objections, members, or issues to raise, those items that are marked with the suggestion to approach to note simply will be noted. So I'll ask the clerk if he wants to actually go through the correspondence.
Thanks, Chair. Item 1 is correspondence from the Department regarding committee queries on the bicycle strategy. Item 3 is correspondence from the Department regarding committee queries on October monitoring. And in table papers, there's correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel regarding a review of the operation of the Barnett formula.
Okay, are members content to note the items marked accordingly?
Great, yeah.
Are members content to include the responses from the Department in the committee inquiry on cycling?
Yep.
Okay, great. Agenda item number 5 is the NI Water briefing on PC15 draft determination. Can I refer members to page 31 of their pack. We have Sarah Venning and Ronan Larkin. Can we welcome you here again today? Can we just say that we will have another briefing as well, so if we can keep your presentation reasonably within 10-15 minutes at most.
Right. Morning, everyone. I'll kick off if that's okay, Chair. We feel like we're quite regular contributors. Yeah. We're all becoming quite familiar with each other. Back just 2 weeks ago, the utility regulator gave a presentation to the committee on the draft determination, and committee members had a number of queries at that time, seeking clarification on the size of the efficiency gap, the areas that were targeted for additional OPEX efficiencies, and some queries about comparisons between Northern Ireland Water and English and Welsh companies, and the issue of funding while public expenditure is constrained. So we just felt very confident that we would be able to come back and add some clarity around that, and that's what we're here today, just to offer a bit of clarity and give you our assessment of the draft determination. So just a few slides, and we shouldn't take too long for your time. The areas that we want to cover, I'm going to kick off with an overview, an introduction, recapping on what being a public body means, because that plays to some questions around profit, recapping on economic regulation itself and the actual price control process, just to enable with the understanding and questioning as we might go on. Ronan's going to pick up on our thinking around OPEX requirements and OPEX efficiencies and the capital challenges that are posed within the draft determination. And we want to explain how financial risk, that is the means of dealing with unforecast cost shocks, have been managed within the price control period, and highlight what that means going forward for us all. So I'm on slide 3 at the minute, and this is just really a recap to say that NI Water was established as a standalone entity in 2007. and it was intended at that time that we would be funded through water charging. But when domestic charges were deferred, a large proportion of the revenue was coming from public funds and continues to do so. So we were reclassified as a non-departmental public body in 8/9. So as a result of that, we have our budgets approved as a subset of the Department for Regional Development's budget annually. We are subject to monitoring round adjustments, either when we need to seek additional funding or if we have to declare any reduced requirements. And our notional profit is generated either by us achieving a higher income than we forecast or by lowering our operating costs. So, and also in addition to this, the value of the assets that we adopt, so that's sewer pipes and sewer pumping stations in the main, are included within that profit figure. But to be very clear, and this was a subject of some conversation the last day, we must have what's public expenditure cover for all of our expenditure. So therefore, when profits are generated, we don't have the ability to retain that or to reinvest it. So on to slide 4 and looking at economic regulation and how it impacts Northern Ireland Water. This is very high level and it's very summary, so I don't claim to be an expert in regulation. Northern Ireland Water is a monopoly provider, so nobody else has a water or a wastewater network that customers can use. They have to come to us. So economic regulation is designed to act as a proxy for competition. Our company's performance is externally benchmarked against the most efficient companies, and then we're challenged to ensure we improve our performance in line with best practice. And at the end of the regulation process, an agreed tariff structure is produced through which the regulated company, that's us, can recover its costs and generate a return on its investment. So the costs that feed into that tariff model are our operating costs, the payments that we make to our PPP providers, an allowance for depreciation of assets and tax, and a level of return on investment. So our non-domestic customers are billed directly using the tariff structure, and the Department for Regional Development provides subsidy as a proxy for domestic charges. Then the other element then of the regulation process is the agreement of outputs that will be delivered. So both service indicators like the level of supply interruptions, the level of leakage that's tolerable, and constructed assets, the number of new wastewater treatment works or kilometres of water mains that are rehabbed. So they're set as part of that regulatory process. And just then on slide 5, to cover the actual price control process, because we keep talking about draft determination and where does that fit in the overall process. Starting at the beginning, we produce a business plan for the price control process, and in this case it's the 6 years from 2015 to 2021. And the utility regulator will consider the company's assumptions, carry out their own independent analysis and challenge us via their draft determination, and that has happened. And then we as a company are given an opportunity to respond to that draft determination, perhaps having established additional evidence to underpin our assumptions or setting out some clarity around the assumptions made by the utility regulator. And that's the stage that we're at now. So we will submit our response to the draft determination today, actually, and we'll highlight to you the areas where we believe we should push back on some of the assumptions contained therein. The regulator then will consider our response and produce what's known as a final determination. And then the company has to consider, can it deliver the outputs demanded within that funding envelope that is allowed, and they either accept or reject the determination. And that will happen in February 2015. So if we accept it, then the tariffs come into force from April, and we will be monitored against those planned outputs. However, if we believe we cannot deliver the outputs for the funding allowed, then we reject. We find we would have to reject the final determination. And in that instance, we would ask the utility regulator for a referral to the Competitions and Mergers Authority, and they would review both our business plan and the utility regulator's final determination, and they would reach their own set of binding conclusions. So that's just a bit of background, and on to slide 6, which sets out actually the principles that underpinned our business plan. When we prepared the plan, the utility regulator I suppose, challenged us and asked for ambition and for vision for NI Water in this setting of a 6-year plan. And we believe we have risen to that challenge. We know that the plan is strong. We know that it's ambitious. It sets out our ambitions for improved customer service and how that dovetails and delivers efficiencies. It's a package, so it's not a pick list, and it strikes the balance between improving service and delivering cost efficiencies. And the plan is very much underpinned by a programme of work that we've called FOM, the Future Operating Model, and it's a transformation programme. And we firmly believe we cannot reap the benefits we've committed to without undergoing that transformation in our organisation. Now, when we put our plan in, we were really quite deliberate in not leading on the differences between ourselves and comparator companies and this whole funding structure. But our plan does absolutely take that into consideration and recognise those constraints. The next slide, slide 7, I guess if you were to keep anything, this is one to put either on your wall or your desk. It just summarises the entire business plan and what it will deliver. So it's very clear that we set out our ambition to be a customer-centric organisation, building their customer views into the heart of our plans, and customer needs to be central to our service delivery offering. And the outputs of this, you can see them across a series of measures. So down at the bottom where we talk about measures on the clean water and the wastewater side and an improved experience. And overall, this plan delivers a reduction in customers' bills of 0.7% per annum. So this plan continues to reduce customers' bills. The plan allows for £1 billion worth of investment in capital, and you can see that that's split across maintaining current service levels and enhancing our service. And we've committed, so I suppose the second point, the first point is we're reducing bills. The second point is the plan commits to delivering £36 million of capital efficiencies over the period. So we believe that by pushing our customer service offering, by wisely investing our capital, we've formulated a business plan that contains £60 million of OPEX efficiencies over the period, so that by the end of the period, our operating costs will be reduced by £22 million per year. And these are some of the key facts when you think about the business plan and you hear about the business plan. This is a plan that drives up service for customers, it keeps bills below inflation, and it delivers £60 million worth of OPEX efficiencies and £36 million of capital efficiencies. Now, slide 8 sets out some of the challenges that the regulator has posed us in the draft determination. And the table shows us how our revenue requirement of £2.4 billion, you can see that under the PC15 business plan, £2.4 billion has been reviewed and challenged by the utility regulator, and they have concluded that our allowance should be reduced by £90 million to £2.3 billion. And that enables the utility regulator to say that they have, through that challenge, they would achieve a reduction of 3.7% in tariffs. But let's look at that reduction. The bulk of it is asked for in OPEX and in PPP costs, and Ronan's going to pick up on the OPEX in more detail, which was the subject of some of the questions the last time. In terms of PPP, so that's our private provider on the clean water and the wastewater side, the utility regulator has set out that we should budget for the PPP failing in their service provision. In other words, we would claim additional service deductions because they have failed in their service agreements with us. And really, we hold the fundamental view that we want the PPP providers to meet their obligations, and therefore we don't set budgets based on the fact that they might fail. As you know, capital is constrained, so there's no reduction in the draft determination in terms of the actual overall capital number, but it does ask for £59 million worth of additional outputs. So if anyone's familiar with the work that we've done in Newcastle, it was a £10 million scheme to upgrade the wastewater treatment works. That's the equivalent of 6 Newcastle schemes extra built into the plan. That's the ask around capital efficiencies. So just before I hand over to Ronan, slide 9 then just really probably sets out the 3 key areas that we feel are worthy of further discussion. I guess in the first instance we would say, though, that we're very pleased with some of the messaging that was in the draft determination, that the draft determination recognises the ambition that we've set out and the strength of the plan. So those are real positives. And just some of the key areas that we see that we might want to discuss further is, and Ronan will pick up on this in detail for you, the size of the OPEX efficiency gap. And this was the topic of some debate the last day. We have assessed the gap to be 19% in our plan. The utility regulator in their draft determination put that gap at 23%. Now, we've carried out some further analysis with independent economists that suggest that gap could be as low as 15%. So if the gap's not as big, the size of the prize isn't as big, in summary. The CapEx efficiency challenge, and we have probably concerns on two fronts in that: the quantum or the size of efficiencies that are being requested, and the pace at which the regulator believes we can deliver them. So the target in the draft determination, it assumes that we have certainty of funding, and it assumes a change in how we procure and how we interact with contractors. And to implement those changes, we need departmental and government support for a relaxing of public sector procurement constraints and controls, and fundamental changes. So therefore we believe that the ask is too high in that regard. And the risk mechanism. You'll hear later that we don't have reserves from which cost shocks can be funded. And because of that, in previous price controls, something known as a relevant items mechanism was devised. So if power costs go up, if we have flooding or a freeze-thaw, an unexpected tax burden, we can use that relevant items mechanism to fund the additional burden. And really that's about asking for additional money through monitoring rounds. The draft determination made no provision for this, for these relevant items. And we believe it's absolutely, in a 6-year window, inconceivable that there will be no cost shocks, and no responsible company could sign up to a final determination that doesn't make provision for that kind of a requirement. So, I'll hand you over to Ronan, who's going to start to take us through some of the OPEX, some of the detail around OPEX.
Oh, thank you, sir. I'll work to keep this fairly brief. We've touched on quite a lot of the ground so far. On slide 10, then, just thinking about OPEX and efficiency review. In overall terms, the utility regulators' draft determination on the business plan has set a challenge for an additional 80% efficiencies and 20% of disallowed costs. The business plan itself, as Sarah said, we have set out a plan that will reduce our operating cost base by the end of this period. Annually, it will be £22 million, like for like, less per annum to run Northern Ireland Water than it is in 12-13. And the draft determination, the regulator is saying, well, actually, we think you should increase that efficiency. They've set another just under £10 million, £9.8 million annual efficiency challenge on top of what we believe is achievable. If I go to the little diagram on the right-hand side there, you'll see the little blue boxes there. So where does that £9.8 million come from? I think the question last time the committee was, what was Northern Ireland Water going to do with this money that you think can be saved, utility regulator? So the £9.8 million is built up from the assessment of the efficiency gap itself, then where the pace of catch-up in terms of the efficiency gap is applied to, and then application of that efficiency challenge. And if I look across those three pieces first, in terms of the efficiency gap, on to slide 11, when we put together PC15, we assessed the gap between us and the Frontier company to be sitting around approximately 19%. The regulator has disallowed what are known as special factors claimed in the business plan, which are legitimate things like we don't have the same sort of conurbations and economies of scale here in Northern Ireland as they do in England and Wales. We have a much more rural environment. We have to get water further out onto the rural network and so on, have to maintain a rural network. So the regulator disallowed £5.8 million of the special factors that we had put into the plan, and that then increases the gap from R19 to what they say is a 20.2% gap. Interesting, last time when the regulator was here, at the little green hexagon at the bottom of page 11, the regulator actually, the cost performance report said they anticipate that gap now to be no more than 18%. So they themselves are saying the gap isn't 23% at this stage, it's 18% now. And we've worked on their alternative modelling. So they set some modelling into the determination. We examined that with them, and we've gone through that modelling. As Sarah was saying earlier, we anticipate the gap might not be any more than maybe 15 to 16% now against the notional Frontier company in England and Wales, and against the average company in England and Wales, that gap might be down to 6 to 7%. So the gap between Northern Ireland Water's costs for water, wastewater services and the Frontier companies in England and Wales has shrunk immensely, and we think it's probably sitting around 15%, which means that the plan is based upon a 23% gap that plan starts to become impossible to deliver, which can have an impact on services then, because you're starting to cut into services in order to meet those numbers. Okay. So if we move on to slide 12 then, as I say, the regulator's examination of the special factor claims that we've put into the plan and set out the detail for the regulator, we will challenge at least £4 million of what they've said we shouldn't be allowed to have. We think it's important that that money is allowed in the plan to protect services. In terms of catch-up, as Sarah said earlier, we set point 2 there on page 12. We set what is an ambitious plan. We said we will seek to catch up 75% of the gap between the existing gap between Northern Ireland Water and the England and Welsh companies. And typically a rule of thumb in regulated water companies is about you could probably catch up 60% in a 5-6 year period. We've said we'll go harder than that. We'll look for 75% of that catch up. We'll set the plan in place to do that. The regulator said it's good. We wanted to catch 80% of the gap up. That push beyond the 75, again, that adds risk to a model, and it adds risk to the ability to provide those services. And I think we'll have to challenge that, and are really responsible to challenge that, particularly in this lack of a risk mechanism in place, in that if we couldn't make the plan, there's no fallback plan, because we'd have to come back to Stormont for money. The Stormont might say, there isn't any. You have to make it work now, or you have to cut the service. And that would have an impact on customers. And then in terms of the catch-up, where the catch-up rate has been applied to, I think we said last time in committee, we anticipate that we will receive an additional £10.6 million in our water rates bill, or in our local authority rates bill next year. So that's just for the water side of our business. There's also a wastewater side. We probably will get a higher bill for that as well. So we anticipate that bill coming. We haven't seen the final analysis of that from LPS and DFP. But the regulator says, well, you should be able to use the efficiency you've got to make on the rest of your business. You should also apply that efficiency to that £10.6 million bill coming from rates. £10.6 million rates bill won't be based on how many wastewater treatments works we have, or could we cut some of those out. It's actually done on a formula called the Cumulo formula, which really assesses how much water we're putting through the network to get to customers' properties. And we think simply we couldn't take £2 million off that rates bill for DFP and LPS. Really the challenge then is to say, we'll find that £2 million somewhere else in the business, which takes you back into loading the model with risk. It is unrealistic to assess that we could take £2 million out of the £10.6 million rates bill. Slide 13, where the regulator has said, outside of those other arguments I've referenced, they've said, well, we're going to disallow some of the operating costs you've asked for. There's about £10 million, bottom right-hand corner of slide 13, tallies to £10.3 million. We think there's some anomalies around how the regulator has come to this. We've shared this with the regulator, and we've shared in a response that goes into the regulator today. On the carbon reduction commitment, we do agree that there will be a CRC uplift, and that should be reflected properly in forecasts. But the regulator has applied an incorrect weighting to the variables in that piece, and that would cost £3.3 million over the 6-year plan. Insurance cost, we've raised a question there with the regulator, and they've already acknowledged that probably does need corrected, so there's £2.8 million there. And then in terms of operating costs from capital schemes going in, so if we're going to put a new piece of capital in, sometimes it drives new operating costs to run that, such as Newcastle maybe. In this case, there's about £2 million over the 6 years to run a pipeline that's being built from Castor Bay to Belfast. And the regulators said, look, we don't think it's valid, you should have the money to run that. We'll challenge that rationale and say it actually requires that to do it. And then Sarah's mentioned the PPP performance deduction. £2.2 million of the savings that the regulator is setting out is based on the hope that the PPP contracts might fail, and then we can deduct performance penalties. We're running those contracts to be successful, not to fail. So that's £10.3 million. On capital, it might be best to go across just to the little diagram on page 15. The regulator assessed that that we should have a capital challenge of 9.1%. So we should be able to deliver everything on the capital programme for 9.1% less than what we're doing today. We think that should be set at around 5.4%. The diagram on slide 15 just tries to set that out. The regulator said they used a triangulated method. We've used the same triangulated method. We've compared that with England and Wales, and we think at best we can get 5.4% out of the capital cost of delivering those schemes against the regulator's 9.1%. You can see on slide 16 we've set our trajectory. The green line is where we think we can get capital efficiencies out across that pace across the 6-year plan, and the red line is where the regulator says flat from day one. We should take 9.1% out of the cost of those schemes with contractors. We think it will take a while to build towards that 5.4% that we set in the plan. The piece becomes around slide 17 in terms of risk mechanism. The draft determination that was for PC15 sets out how risk will be dealt with in terms of risk that might arise during the 6-year plan. And the key line is the bold line, or the memorandum of understanding and consequent written agreement. So if in the event that we were to come to an issue during PC15, there is an MOU, we can talk to the regulator and the department about that. However, that takes us on to the relevant items that might arise. So it could be, say, a huge shock in price rise in power bills or something through the period outside of our control. Currently, that mechanism as exists today in PC13, it isn't funded, and under the current constraints that Stormon's facing, it can't be funded. And we think that would be a problem to set a 6-year plan in place, as tight as it is with those risks inherent in it, and have no fallback position to deal with some of those shocks should they arise. We think that would provide a risk to the organisation, probably to the customers as well, and to the delivery of those services in Northern Ireland during the plan. The basis upon which the draft determination sets that out is no longer there, because really this year, 14-15, we've seen the pressures that have had to be faced in Stormont, some of those safeguards to be removed, and that we think that would prevail through PC15 as well. So we've set some detail out there on slide 18. And I think really what we'll do in our response, we'll highlight the concerns around having really what is a public health utility with no fallback mechanisms anywhere in it in the event that there might be an issue. So in conclusion there, our response goes in today. So we make the response to the regulator today. We note the regulator does recognise many of the strengths in the business plan, the improved efficiencies, the ongoing solid investment in services and so on. But there are areas of ground that aren't as common between us, and where they are there, they're quite important, we think, to the preservation of the services for customers today and customers into the future. And that area of OPEX efficiency gap, CAPEX efficiency, and the risk mechanism, really we think our response will be based around those, not around, can we not improve the service to customers? That already caters for that. But those areas are important that we continue to preserve the service that we set out in the PC15. Chairman, that finishes our presentation.
Okay, thank you for that. I suppose there's a few. I have a few questions, and I'll open it to the floor. I think, Sarah, you made the point in terms of. I just want to pull you back on one of the statistics. I think it was on slide number 8. Or maybe it was wrong. I'm not sure. I was taking notes just as you were going along there. You talked about the field service in terms of PPP projects.
Yes.
Has that ever happened before in terms of field projects?
So, yes, the PPP contracts are very large contracts, and they do have penalties, I suppose, if you fail a service indicator. So, yes, to date, we have made service deductions to the PPP contracts in line with if they've failed a service. So, yes, it has happened. And so some of the utility regulators' thinking is, well, if it has happened in the past, it might happen in the future, so therefore let's budget on it. And really, our stance is, it has happened in the past. We work with the PPP contractors. We definitely don't budget for it happening in the future.
I suppose I could be forgiven for thinking that you're trying to build in a large degree of comfort for yourselves by not taking a challenge from the regulator in terms of that, because on your own admission, Sarah, if it's happened before, and given the organisations and how they function, it's highly likely that it is going to happen again. And I mean, we're only talking about £4 million over 6 years.
4 million out of 2.4 billion.
Yeah.
So yes, but we would definitely not. And I don't think people, running your own business, if you had somebody coming in, you wouldn't say, you're coming in to do work for me, and I'm setting aside this amount of money because I think you're going to do it wrong.
No, but you live in the real world and expect that something is going to go wrong as well.
And certainly not to that level of failure. So as we've set our business plan up and we've looked at it, we would not anticipate that that's realistic level of failure that we would think would happen over the next 6 years.
In terms of just going forward in relation to that, it would be useful maybe for my own, to set my own mind at ease in that. Could you supply us a paper in terms of what's the pattern of that over the last number of years, in terms of what those failures have been, how much actually you have penalised the PP companies for, just so as we can get our heads around actually what the value of that actually is.
Yeah.
In terms of the yourselves, are the department any closer to resolving the governance challenges that have been set by the regulator as well?
I'm not sure
Well,
I
I mean-
understand that the regulator has set a challenge around governance.
I'd better frame that different road then. No, I'll come back to that. I'll ask that a different way in a moment. In terms of the draft determination, have you ever taken them to the CMA before?
No, and one of the last points that Ronan did make is that what we want to do, and we won't take anyone to the CMA. The utility regulator, if there was a disagreement, would make a referral to the CMA, so it wouldn't be the company. And we have in Northern Ireland set up a water senior stakeholders grouping whose aim is to avoid anything like that from happening. So we would prefer that that wouldn't be the case, and we just do, between ourselves, the regulator, and the department, need to find a way through to ensure that the company, that the regulator and the department can discharge their duty, I suppose, in ensuring that the company is funded. And then with the company having surety over funding, really it's for us to say, is the challenge here one that we can deliver against, and that enables us to move forward. So in previous price control periods, there has been uncertainty running up to it, but we've always managed to find a way through it, and we very much would want to work collaboratively with both the regulator and the department for that to happen in this instance.
But at this stage, are you actually threatening to take it to CMA? Or
We're not threatening
No,
anything
I
at all.
think it's important to say we haven't seen a final determination yet. We'll see that in mid-December. But that final determination, when the regulator sets that out, if the company is to accept it, it becomes a contract between the company and the regulator, and the department's in there as well. And so the company will have to think very carefully about if the final determination is an incredibly stretching plan with huge output targets over the 6-year period with no mechanism to deal with some of these shocks, and the company directors accept the plan, they're in a binding contract. And that has to be very carefully weighed, Chairman. You know?
Again, for my own benefit, because I haven't been here in previous years, but so you've set out that there's a huge disparity between yourselves and the regulator. Has that been the same on every occasion?
It hasn't. It's been a narrow one across the year. This is our third price control.
Yeah.
So we had a price control 15, 13, 10, and then our strategic business plan. Back in 2007, the efficiency gap between Northern Ireland Water and these peer companies in England and Wales, the comparator group, was about 50%.
Yeah.
Today we think that's narrowing towards 15%. And we think, therefore, when you know, there's less opportunity just to cut and hack costs. You've really got to come in and transform what you're doing across the period. If it's set too hard, and you don't get that transformation activity right, and it takes a while to transform it. It's taken 7 years to get it to where we are today. We think that just poses a lot of risk to the ongoing improvement, and I think to the services to customers. And we want to avoid a situation where a risk arises around the services in the customer.
And this is, I suppose, in the scale of things, there are differences, but this is a smaller difference than the difference that there was between us and PC10, and a smaller difference again. So,
But given Ronan's example, it should be smaller, given that your efficiency has been driven down from almost 50% to arguably between 18% and 23%. So, and maybe that's why the regulator haven't been as hard as maybe they should have been either.
Well, I think a lot of that is around. I mean, where there are differences, there's a lot of match-up. The regulator recognises the ambition we've set in the plan. They recognise the improvements we're highlighting for the services. But where those differences do appear, Chairman, they're important, because if you think if the DD says the gap's 23%, and already the regulator acknowledges in a cost performance report that the gap's actually sitting at 18%. The ability to take out and save that additional £60 million on top of the £22 million per year we'd save, that difference doesn't exist.
Maybe, Ronan, it would be useful if the two of you should bang your heads together and actually agree what that figure is, whether it's 23, 18 or 15. Because
I think that's a great suggestion.
I have to say I'm somewhat confused the first day that you were coming to the table to say 18, they're coming to the table to tell us 23, and now you're coming to the table today to talk about 15.4. So maybe you should all bang your heads together and actually try and get that one thrashed out and actually come back and tell us what the figure really is.
We'll keep doing that. We've done some meetings with the regulator already, and in a response today we'll be offering to sit around the table and talk them through our analysis of it.
I think that would be useful. I think that would be useful from our perspective as well, because so once you're talking about efficiencies, where you're talking about efficiency from 23% or 15%, I accept the point you're making in terms it's more difficult if you're sitting at 15% in terms of that difference. But if the regulator is still quoting you at 18, I think initially they did say 23, they're still quoting you at 18. So for my mind, that there's an argument to have between yourselves and them. And the sooner you bang your heads together and come back and tell us what that is, the
I
better.
guess the comfort for the committee is, even if it is at 18, our business plan was based on that level, so that the efficiencies and the offering in the business plan matches with the gap in the cost and performance report.
But I still think going forward it'd be useful to drill down and get an accepted figure. So
It would be excellent, but I would have to, in the honest, I'm always trying to be open and honest, and the regulators and regulated utilities generally don't get to that space.
But as well as that, you also, of course, trying to defend yourselves as well. Because one of the things you did say that last day in Course Corner, you were trying to make an example that how the regulator compared yourselves with some of the other companies in England. So you do seem to be in the defensive as well, and don't necessarily take the criticism. Sean?
I'll come back to the question you were putting, Trevor, about the governance. Is the department any closer to resolving your governance issues?
The department have, I suppose I can't really speak for the department. I understand that there has been paper lodged with the budget review group that set out some considerations in that regard, and really just the feedback that we have had is it's recognised as suboptimal, and we haven't had anything further on that, other than we do continue to be an NDPB and a company who is regulated, and I suppose as the person in charge of the organisation, we just try to make the best of what we can in that world, and as I focus the team, I'm saying to them, look, let's focus on service.
Yeah, and just to explain what your local risk mechanisms are, your local risks mechanisms are.
Yeah. The area of risk, what we're trying to say here with risk is that when you agree a plan and a tariff structure, you get this amount of money, and it assumes, let's say it's power, or it assumes a certain amount of expenditure on power. If it rains terribly, or actually there is a big hike in the power cost, such that your power bill goes way up, and remember ours is 34 million, so it does take a very small percentage increase for our bill to go up, then that's not included within your tariff structure, and you need to pay the electricity bill. So what are you going to do? If you have a risk mechanism, and that's what we're talking about. In the past, when we hit this stumbling block, I guess, the department and the utility regulator came up with a mechanism, and they called it a memorandum of understanding, and there was a consequential written agreement that said if the company has one of these things known as a relevant item, they can make a submission and we can rule and say, yes, we accept your power has gone up, you couldn't have foreseen that, that should be funded. And the department would have, through a monitoring round, found that money. Well, this year we had a valid relevant item bid, and the monitoring rounds had no money. So therefore, within this price control, we now have evidence to say that this mechanism doesn't work, it's not funded in this current price control period. So therefore, to sign up to a 6-year price control period based on that, it doesn't give any certainty now. You know, we've all seen the evidence of no certainty, and moreover, where we tried to estimate and said, look, here's the quantum of relevant items that you might need to budget for looking 6 years into the future, that wasn't included in the draft determination, and that leaves us as an organisation to say, well, where do we go? If there's a when there was a freeze thaw, we had to spend over £500,000 on tankering costs. Power costs can come up, you can be hit with a tax bill. There's so many things that could happen in 6 years, and you do, if you come and say, well, it's £2 million, and the department says, I haven't got the money, so does that mean then you have to stop a service?
Yeah, but it's probably not ideal because it's similar to DRD and road maintenance in your monitoring rounds. It's not the ideal way to run a budget.
Yes, and I guess we have shown we've made good use of the money we have, and we've made it work to a degree. But that local arrangement, when we're compared to the England and Wales companies, what those companies are obliged to do in England and Wales is that they've got to demonstrate, their boards of directors have got to demonstrate that they have further backup reserves if there is a problem that they can put into the piece to carry it over the short term, and if it's then passed by the regulator tariffs, they're allowed to do it the following year. Our local arrangement is meant to be the proxy for that. But in a world where that local arrangement isn't cash backed, then you have nothing, and that isn't good. I think that's we talk about the risk that could pose to services. Then, in the immediate term, it can be a problem.
You don't mind if I come in on that point, Shane?
Yeah.
You see, in terms of that 34 million you talked about, Sarah,
Yes.
so in terms of your business plan,
Yes.
whenever you'd been doing your business plan, you would have factored in terms of electricity costs.
Yes.
What was the true cost versus actually what you had initially factored in?
Moving back, or you mean?
Moving back, first of all.
Well, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Well, I'll tell you why I'm asking the question.
But we have made
You're going to
efficiencies
pay-
in power.
You go to pains to suggest that if it goes up a small percentage, that it's going to cost you a considerable amount of money. The point I'm trying to establish is that previously, I'm sure you're going into this with a vision that over the 5-year period that electricity costs are going to go up. Not necessarily year 1 or year 2, but over that period, they're going to
Yes,
go up.
yes, yes.
So at 34 million, in terms of what you're budgeting at the moment, what are you budgeting for at the moment? Your actual cost 34 million, what's your budget cost?
Well, we've put that some of our power usage will go down because we have a plan to continue to improve our power usage, and we've put in an agreed inflation factor for power. Okay, so it's based on a national level, and it's agreed with the regulator.
Yeah.
But the mechanism, Chairman, is that if something happens beyond the borders of Northern Ireland, geopolitical, and power prices just go through the roof.
Ronan, can I ask you when that last happened?
It happened when in Fujiyama in Japan, when the nuclear reactor was hit with the tsunami.
I don't think we've got nuclear power in Northern Ireland.
No, but it impacted world prices. What happened was it took a nuclear plant out, and world prices went up immediately. It happened when in North Africa, when you had the Irish Spring in North Africa, prices went up immediately.
What effect did it have to your company then?
It had two effects. Immediately, we had to look at what we could do around securing better pricing in the market, and we had taken some action to put pricing in that countered against that. But we're not allowed to go beyond that. You know, in England, Wales, they can hedge against that with financial instruments. Under our governance model at the moment, and our public ownership model, we're not really allowed to get into hedging to that extent, because that would be seen as the controls around public money for that are different than they are in private companies. So the impact would be that we would be exposed to that if that price just was to go up. We would be exposed as a company, and we could be faced with a much higher power bill that would then bring us back to the department to say we need some additional money to fund this power bill.
And that's really useful if I could get an answer to the question in terms of, so 34 million is the actual cost, what you're spending, what actually have you budgeted for within your business plan?
Yeah.
Sean?
No, I just want to follow up on that. Just the costs are going down, we'll say, in terms of oil at the moment. Would you see a dividend there and a space for you to operate?
What we did this year, yes, this year, so right at the moment, Sean, quite a lot of our power pricing, we fixed quite a bit. We kept some of it floating and some fixed, and we've had the wins out of that this year, which is why we've been able to generate savings last year and this year that we've passed through to tariffs then for customers and for subsidy. Oil went down to a low yesterday, down to around $3 a barrel yesterday, and it's an historic low for 10-year low, I think. Most of our power is around gas-fired power from the power stations. So we monitor the gas price on a daily basis, and we're ready to take action for that. And gas is at a similar low, and that's partly why the risk is there. Because if that power price was to go up through the 6-year period, and it's quite a long period to think about where that power might be, that's when you have the exposure as to where you get to with power. So we do take some corrective action, but we are exposed to a degree of it.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Cathal?
Thanks, Chair. And Chair, yourself and Deputy Chair have covered quite a bit there, but I'm just saying, given that the final determination is due in December,
Yes.
how close are you to seeing your challenges to the draft determination being accepted?
It's probably a question for the utility regulator. We believe we have a strong business plan. We have some challenges to the draft determination. There's some areas that we'll accept, so we were challenged for additional outputs. We'll accept the majority of those, so that's good for customers. We work now over this next couple of month periods with the utility regulator to explain, to give the evidence, and they've said they're an evidence-based regulator. So we would like to think that where evidence exists, they will be able to take that evidence but what they do with it and what they put in their final determination, I can't predict, and I do have to wait to see what they come out with.
Would you accept that some perhaps of your challenges probably are improbable, like that they're unlikely to?
Well, some of them they may not accept, and that's why when you get a final determination as a board of directors, we have to look at the package, because we are cleared as a package, and say, for this amount of revenue, can we deliver this amount of outputs? And we recognise that once we sign up to it, we have to deliver it.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you, Cathal. Joe, you're next.
Chairman, thanks, and I welcome the presentation by both of you.
Thank you.
Certainly have gone into a lot more detail than was this previous occasion. However, the fog still permeates.
Exists.
Yeah. The fact is you can't retain profits. So that means, do you have a contingency reserve then?
No.
No.
What has been the retained profits for each of the last 3 years, or what is actual profits for each of the last 3 years?
Well, we set that out, I think, in a recent response to the committee. And
Well, what are the three figures?
well, again, taking the most immediate figure, last year there was an operating profit of £153 million. 60 of it was a notional boost around this adopted assets. 40 million was, again, it was a change in what tax we had to put through the P&L for the company of about 40 million. That leaves 50. Out of that 50 million then we would have paid a £24 million dividend back to the department, and we would have then used some of that money to build the capital schemes as opposed to borrowing more money off government to build the capital schemes. Any surpluses that are left at the end of a financial year go straight back through into public purse effectively.
So, Roland, if you're making a profit, you can rejig slightly then and use some alternatives, sources of financing a capital project.
Only within the constraints, Joe, of the PE model. So we can't use any surplus if we don't have PE cover for it. So we have
Public
to have,
expenditure cover.
yes, we have to have. Even if we had £10 million in the bank at the end, last year we had £3 million in cash at the end of the year, and that cash just was used in the business the following week, sort of thing.
So in the last year you had 50 million. Is that right?
Well, if you take out that 100, you had about 50 million of what you could describe as operating profit. 24 million is then used to pay a dividend, okay?
And DAP, to Mr Hamilton.
24 million to the DRD, DFP effectively, yes, back into the public purse effectively. And then, even if we had a cash surplus, doesn't matter how much cash we would or wouldn't have, we can only spend money where we have PE cover.
Okay.
And the DD will impact the PE cover. It'll set PE cover effectively.
Okay. 36 million of capex efficiencies. How is it possible to realise 36 million of capital efficiency?
Do you want to? There's a number of ways of looking at it. I mean, we're looking at just being, when we set out the tenders, to be absolutely clear on the tendering that we're looking for efficiencies.
So the tendering was too generous, was it?
No, I think just the view is that we want to try and push it harder, but not to the point that operators can't operate, because otherwise you then have a broke construction sector here. Earlier contract involvement in maybe some of the design features of a work, so that you're not designing something in that costs money that maybe could have been avoided. So continue to improve what we do there, and we've been doing that over the last 10 years with the capital schemes. We have a good capital programme. We think we can improve it, and maybe some relaxation of some of the governance constraints around. Again, because we're a publicly owned company, there are options for the English and Welsh companies where they can get into incentive-based mechanisms where we can't get into, and that's why the regulator's 9.1% is really based on what private companies can do in England. We have to respect the public sector environment we operate in here today in Northern Ireland, and we don't have access to all of those. But our £36 million is where we think we can push harder on some of those schemes.
Okay, thanks. Lastly, I asked the question, what was the separation between the two divisions, the water division and the sewage division, in relation to these efficiencies?
Yes, you did.
You did actually ask the yeah.
And we haven't set that out for you. That's the one that
That's the
we
bit of
probably...
residual fog that I...
So we come back to you on that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not pursuing it for an academic exercise, but it's to see, is there a more cost difficulty relating to sewage than there probably is with water?
We think the sewage side is the piece that will require us to go harder at during PC15. That there's probably more we can do on the sewage side, because there's been quite a lot of investment in the water side over the last 10 years, more required, but it's probably the sewage side that the balance would sit on.
And lastly, Chairman, what's the rationale for the need for this FOM, this future organisation model?
Yeah, well, so if I can take this, because I really believe in this.
Blue sky thinking?
Well, it's not blue sky thinking, it's common sense. So the first thing you do when you have to save a bit of money, if you have to save money in your house, you go down and you do the basic things, the simple things, the things that are glaring at you. And we've done all those. And now we're at the stage where we said, and we look around and we look at what other people do. Now we're at the stage that says, actually we have to do it differently. We don't do less off, we've cut the fat off, we need to do it differently. And we started on this journey.
Strategic approach then to the management.
I guess we started on this journey, Joe, around how can we do things better for customers. And as we looked at how we could do things better for customers, you start to look at things that says, if you write into me and you're asking about a bill, maybe I send the billing team out, and then maybe they send a meter query technician out, and then potentially does somebody from the water end of the business go out. And actually, when you look at that, have 3 or 4 different people been dealing with your one query, and has that introduced costs, and has that introduced poor service for the customer? So we've started to look at our business from what do customers want, and I believe that by making changes to deliver better service, we will be able to strip out cost, and therefore, in order to get the significant savings, so this 75% catch-up, which is more ambitious than the 60% that normally would be put forward, you need to do something fundamentally different. We started on the journey saying we were doing it for service. It has the added benefit of it delivers these efficiencies. Now, I firmly believe that if we don't make this fundamental change, you can't get the efficiencies out. You have to streamline your processes in order to get the money out. So I don't so much see it as blue sky thinking as I see it as this is fundamentally wanted to do this for customer. It has the benefit of providing efficiencies, but it is key to our plan.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, John.
Okay. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned at your presentation that in 2007 there was an intention to provide funding through water charging. Has the department approached you to any extent in recent times to seek your views of what a fair water charging system might look like?
So we don't design the water charging system. Each year now, as the tariffs are set, we continue through that tariff process to say this is the tariff that a business customer would receive, and we generate those tariffs that would be applied to domestic customers, and that is how the subsidy is then calculated and we are funded. So we would set out each year this is the tariff, this is the domestic element of the tariff.
Okay. If I could ask one quick or local-based question, Chair. There are works on a main arterial routeway in East Belfast, Upper Newtonards Road, scheduled that seem to follow a previous period of works from Transport NI. What work does Northern Ireland Water undertake to try and ensure that when there is works on main arterial routeways by different agencies that they are coordinated together?
So there is an overall coordinating department. There is a Somology system whereby any utility that needs to do work will enter their requirements into that system, and the intention there is to try and coordinate utilities. That isn't always possible. But certainly it is one of our factors of consideration. So when for example, if a public realm scheme is being done, we are informed, and actually as a utility and someone who has knowledge of more than one utility, as a utility we actually allocate capital to go in at the same time and do upgrade work to prevent us having to go in subsequently. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but we always liaise with Transport NI around road openings.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. I think Chris actually raised albeit maybe constituency based today. I think it's a point actually the public comment on. I mean, there's been suggestions obviously in terms of Northern Ireland Water in the past in terms of water charges and different regulators in terms of profits. But one of the pet hates in terms of local people are actually road service will be digging up road this week. You'll come back in a month's time digging up for yourselves. A few weeks later, then BT's coming back. So, I mean, when you're talking, in your response, Sarah, to Joe, in terms of efficiencies, I think that's actually one area that you really should look into with more vigour in terms of trying to actually crack that nut, because it's frustrating to the public, and there must be a huge cost to your department for that. And just in closing, can I ask you, Sarah, in terms of the question that Joe did pose to you, can we get that fairly
The split of,
Speedily.
of water and
Yes.
wastewater, yes.
Because I think it's disappointing that Joe didn't ask that on the previous day. And I mean,
I-
we're talking about, we're trying to get our heads around whether to support you or in terms of the regulator, in terms of the challenges you're facing, or they're trying to pressure they're trying to put you under. But it is disappointing whenever a member has asked for a relevant piece of information that would have been useful to him today in terms of his analysis, that you've been unable to provide that. So if we can get that fairly urgently.
Apologies, it was an oversight. I think we picked up on the most of them, but I do apologise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, members, agenda item number 6. We're going to have a departmental briefing now on enforcement cameras and bus lanes. We can refer members to page number 52 in their pack. Okay, Kieran, Aidan and Peter, you're very welcome. I presume, Kieran, you're making the presentation, so...
I'll just lead in, and Peter will take the main part of the presentation.
Okay.
That's okay. Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
yeah.
Yeah, Chairman, members, thank you very much for your time this morning. Just to give you briefly the background, moving traffic offences, it's part of the Department's commitment to making sure that the work we do as far as public transport and sustainability, the enforcement of the bus lanes, our goal is to switch modal shift from the private car to public transport, cycling and walking. And the enforcement of the bus lanes we consider is a very important part of that. We have provided about 50 kilometres of bus lanes in Belfast in the last number of years at a cost of about £13 million, and the Department has also provided TransLink with about 1,000 buses in the last 7 or 8 years. So we have a huge investment in public transport. So it's important that we provide the priority for the buses with the bus lanes and then make sure that we enforce it. We also, I suppose, with the huge emphasis now on cycling and walking, the facilities of the bus lanes also provide for cyclists. And looking forward, the Department still has its programme for quality bus corridors on the non-BRT routes and the BRT system, which we hope to introduce in 2017, where we will be bringing in about another 14 or 15 miles of bus lanes in addition to what was brought in Belfast on the move. And the quality bus corridor programme that continues on the other arterial routes, that will continue as well. So it's important from our point of view then that we actually enforce that. We did carry out a survey in February 2013 that found a significant number of people were using the bus lanes illegally, and approximately 50% of the vehicles in the bus lanes were actually travelling in those illegally. So that's just where we're coming from, and I'll ask Peter now to go through the rest of the presentation, and then obviously questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. As Kieran mentioned, the enforcement of bus lanes is a key aspect as part of the overall public transport provision. The traffic survey identified a problem, and we looked at a range of options as to how we could tackle that problem as part of a business case. And we did about 13 variations, but they're all based around really the 3 areas. One is leave it as it is. One is you look at bringing the police to do more of the enforcement, or you look to bring in cameras. Taking the first option, if you leave it as is, leaving it as is means that the enforcement won't improve. You will continue to have a high level of misuse of bus lanes. This will continue to impact on buses using the bus lanes, impacts on their journey time. It also reduces the attractiveness of public transport. It undermines the investment Kieran talked about in public transportation. And it also frustrates the majority of law-abiding drivers who do adhere to the bus lanes. The other option then is the police. Can the police do more enforcement, i.e. bring in more officers, or can the police use cameras? Now, in our discussions with the PSNI, they already enforce bus lanes, but their resources are limited. They have other priorities, and they've indicated that they have no additional resources that they could allocate to this particular enforcement. If the police were to bring in cameras to enforce bus lanes, then any fines generated by the police through camera enforcement is retained by Treasury. It's lost to the Northern Ireland Bloc. So the costs of that, which could be up to 150,000 a year, would have to be borne by the police, PSNI. The other area then is the use of cameras in conjunction with the PSNI. Use of cameras by the department in conjunction with the PSNI. And this is our preferred option. This increases the opportunity of catching people driving in bus lane. It improves enforcement. It's also more flexible. It means we have cameras to enforce both bus lanes, we have the PSNI to also target areas, and we have a mobile unit which also targets areas. It covers both the city centre and also the arterial routes. And crucially, it's also cost effective because any charges generated by the cameras from the department are retained by the department, and they can be used to offset the costs of installing the cameras and running the system. That preferred option is a case of static cameras in the city centre and the mobile unit. Looking at the static cameras, a number of areas were looked at in conjunction with colleagues in PSNI, TransLink and traffic management within the department. We identified around 15 potential locations in the city centre where static cameras could be used. These are locations where the bus lanes are in operation for at least 12 hours a day. We looked at the results of the survey done in 2013. We took some local surveys ourselves by the department to try and ascertain where are the highest areas of misuse. And from that analysis, we identified the cameras locations identified in that slide: East Bridge Street, Donegal Square East, Castle Street, Donegal Square South, College Square East, and Great Victoria Street. And those proposals were proposed to and accepted by the project board. In addition to the static cameras, we're also looking at having one mobile unit which will be used primarily on the arterial routes. And it would work to an agreed rota to ensure that all of the arterial routes are covered, and the visibility of that there is seen across the whole of the city. Both the static and the mobile unit would use cameras that are basically used in other cities across the UK: Glasgow, Edinburgh, Nottingham. And in fact, all of them will have to be approved by the Department of Transport Vehicle Certification Agency. Just to go through the operation of what happens. The camera is focused on the bus lane and is constantly recording that bus lane. The vehicle drives into the bus lane. It then looks at the number plate and identifies, is this an authorised vehicle? Is it a bus or whatever? If it is, then no further action is taken. If it's not an authorised vehicle, then the camera records a clip of that vehicle driving in the bus lane. That evidence pack, as we would call it, is then reviewed by staff to ascertain, has an offence occurred? If an offence has occurred, then that information is passed on to colleagues in the department, in our Coleraine processing unit, and they will request the driver details from the DVA. Having got the details, they would then issue a penalty charge notice to that individual, along with 3 photographs showing their vehicle in contravention of the bus lane. And that would also include details of how they would pay that PCN. The charges for PCN would be similar to parking in the street or illegal parking. It would be £45 if paid within 14 days, or £90 if paid between 15 and 28 days. The purpose of improving or bringing in cameras is to improve the enforcement of bus lanes, is to deter people driving in bus lanes as part of, Kieran says, that overall public transportation mix. It's very difficult to estimate the number of PCNs we're likely to issue because this depends on driver behaviour. Nevertheless, we have estimated that around 15,000 PCNs could be issued each year. That's around 50 a day. Now, this estimate depends on driver behaviour. It's based on fact on the high level of misuse of bus lanes as identified in the 2013 survey. It looks at the experience of other cities in the UK, primarily Nottingham, and it also assumes that we will get a 95% reduction in the misuse of bus lanes 6 months after the cameras go operational. That level of PCN is then it will likely generate between £500,000 and £700,000 to the department. The setup costs for the system are £160,000. That's capital investment. And that includes about £60,000 for the cameras, £70,000 for the software systems, and around £30,000 for the cameras, for the poles and signs, etc. The running costs of the system depend on, again, driver behaviour. The more PCNs, the higher cost to operate the system. We're estimating that the cost is between £100,000 and £150,000. That includes £45,000 for the mobile unit, includes £30,000 for the camera and IT software. It includes about £25,000 for NSL to process the PCNs, and include up to about £50,000 for the department to process PCNs. The proposals today is for the department bringing forward the necessary legislation, A, to make driving in a bus lane a civil offence, as well as maintaining it as a criminal offence to be enforced by the PSNI, and also to be able to use cameras to enforce vehicles driving in bus lanes, bus gates, or bus-only streets. It is proposed, subject to the committee's views today, to lay legislation before the Assembly in October. If the Assembly are content, then the next stage would be to discuss the proposals with various stakeholders. This would include the various local councils, chambers of commerce, SUSTRANS, Belfast City Centre Management, taxi organisations and others. We will also be informing the public about these proposals, primarily through articles in the media, advertisements in news signs along the bus lanes, and indeed publishing information on NI Direct. At this stage, we would anticipate the cameras could be installed by January 2015 and then phased in over a number of months in 2015. We would aim, as part of that initial phasing in, that anyone caught driving in a bus lane would be issued with a warning letter for their first offence rather than a PCN. That's a very quick run-through of our proposals, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I feel it very repetitive saying I'm new to this, but I know the committee has visited this area before, Kieran.
Yes.
And I think there was reservations maybe I'm detecting from some of the comments I've listened to over the last number of days in relation to that. I have to say, I suppose, so given I'm new, I can understand the requirement, because the committee have been supportive of Belfast on the Move. They're also, in terms of the rapid transport, and in terms of how that will roll out and how you would want that to work effectively. But I suppose, I mean, one of the things I do share, certainly with the former chairman, was actually, it seems that this was the only show in town, was the first thing. I mean, Peter did say there was, I think it was 15 options, 13 options. I can't even read my own writing, sorry. But you only actually cited 2 of those, which was between as-is or police. You actually didn't give us the list of what the options were. So it's difficult for me to get my head around what these other options were and how much study went into that. But one of the things does strike me, so we've arrived, or the department have arrived at a situation in terms of introducing cameras. But one of the things that, and I think this has come up before, in terms of the survey, you've picked 6 sites. 3 of the sites you've picked weren't surveyed. So I suppose the obvious question is, why were those sites picked?
Okay. There are 2 surveys. There was a survey done in 2013 which looked at both the bus lanes in the city centre that were there at that time, and indeed the bus lanes on the arterial routes. And that was done at a moment in time. The issue of where the location of the static cameras are in the city centre, some of those bus lanes weren't in place at the time of 2013. We identified those potential sites from discussions with PSNI, TransLink and Traffic Management, i.e. from observation they says we think there's an issue at that particular location or another location. So we had some information from the 2013 survey. We then supplemented that by a range of local surveys undertaken by the departmental staff to go out and observe during peak periods as to what the likely infringements were, and we recorded that. And based on that information, we identified where are the areas with the highest contraventions.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've just left me obviously a lead-in question, or the follow-up question from that is, so if you're going to the areas with the highest possibility in terms of someone actually going into bus lane, in terms of your own survey, the 3 areas that you actually have surveyed, there's other ones actually with 86%, 78%, 78%. I mean, I can read from well, no point in actually reading from yours. You will have the rest of the survey. But you've taken Castle Street with 61%. There's areas in Belfast, there's 81%, sorry, 86, 78, 78, 76, 76. So if I take Castle Street at 61%, May Street at 28, Oxford Street at 37. So why have they been picked over and above if the impetus of this is actually because of the higher...
Yeah, you're right, Chair. There's two ways of looking at this. It's trying to get the balance between the number of static cameras and mobile cameras. The bus lanes in Belfast city centre primarily operate for at least 12 hours a day, Monday to Saturday, and they are better positioned than for a static camera to use there. The high figures that you're quoting there are on arterial routes, and on arterial routes there will be a series of bus lanes along those. To target those arterial routes, we would need to put up a series of static cameras all the way along the arterial route. We found the most cost-effective way of trying to tackle that issue is...
Peter, sorry to stop you there, but in terms of your survey won't have been carried out along the entire arterial route. It would have been carried out at a particular point.
Right.
So based on your evidence, the evidence base that you actually have, I mean, I wouldn't really want you to think that I'm entirely stupid, that if there's a 3-mile lead into Belfast, that this represents the total 3 miles. Your surveyors would have carried this out at one point. So that would say to me that if you're going to place static cameras, you'd have placed it at the ones were the highest in terms of those who are going to contravene what you're trying to address. So if it's a 3-mile route into Belfast, so it's not that 3 miles that we're going to have to camera, it's wherever you carried out your survey that you've got those results. So really answer the question, why in areas of Belfast there's 86% of those contravening what you're trying to do, as opposed to Oxford Street or May Street where there are only 28%?
On those areas in the arterial route, we would be targeting them, and we would be using the mobile unit rather than proposing to put...
But why would you do that? So you could do that in Belfast.
Chairman, can I just, I think it's the threat of the mobile unit. It's the fact that it doesn't appear all the time. If you put up a camera, it's a bit like the speed cameras. Everybody knows there's a speed camera in Saintfield Road. They slow down as they approach that camera. If we put up a fixed camera on, say, the Malone Road or wherever, people will get to know that, they'll avoid that bus lane and they'll go in further down. Whereas if we have the flexibility to move around the mobile unit, we can go in at various times, unexpected as far as those drivers are concerned.
But Kieran, that's all good. But in terms of the highest proportion of offences are occurring in other areas as opposed to areas in the centre of Belfast that's been picked. So why can we not have static? If static cameras is the only show in town, and I'm told out of the 13 things you looked at, 12 of those actually were involving cameras. So if you've 86% in the arterial route of Belfast, why were cameras not considered there?
It would be a cost issue, because if you take, say, the Andersonstown Road bus lane, there are probably about 12 or 14 sections of that bus lane. We would have to put up cameras all the way along that bus lane to actually enforce it properly. Whereas if we have the mobile unit, it's not like the bus lanes are just one continuous long bus lane all the way into town or out of town. They're actually shorter stretches, so they require a different approach. The static cameras, places like Castle Street and the bus gates and on basically Adelaide Street and the back of City Hall, are very important from a traffic management point of view and a safety point of view, and they operate all day. So the static camera will operate on those, and we can also bring the mobile unit into the city centre as well for streets that are outside the for streets that are outside the places where we have the static cameras. All these locations are areas where we've had complaints over a long period from Belfast City Centre management, from TransLink, from various representatives from the cycling lobby, that people are actually breaking the laws. Castle Street in particular is one where it's a bus-only street, and it's so bad we're actually putting cameras in both directions because we consider it quite unsafe.
I suppose the contradiction in what you've just said is that in all these areas people are actually breaking the law, not just Castle Street. In terms of your own surveys indicate that other areas are breaking the law more often than people in Castle Street. But on that point, I'll bring the Deputy Chair in.
Yeah, sorry, I have to pop into another meeting. at 11:30. I know that we support the broad theme of the rapid transport, and we need enforcement, and it doesn't become rapid if it's jammed up and all of that. And I know that one of the last times we discussed this, Kieran, and you would be familiar with it, was Dublin, and there was no cameras, but there was a dedicated, I think, dedicated police units within their districts to police it, and therefore, and I don't know how you looked at that in any great detail and how successful it was. Because looking at all, before we come to the correct option here, I think we do need to explore all of the options.
Yeah. I suppose, Sean, we did look at Dublin. Obviously, I was involved in the Quality Bus Network office in Dublin. And since the last meeting, when you raised the issue, I've actually been in contact with my colleagues in Dublin. They are just completing the enforcement of red light running cameras, and the next thing they're going to move on to is using bus lane camera enforcement on bus lanes. Once again, it's all about resources in the police, the Garda Síochána in Dublin, that they're now beginning to run out of resources as far as that's concerned. And obviously, there's different priorities, and a bit like we've been doing PSNI, traffic is a very low priority as far as enforcement is concerned in Northern Ireland. And in Dublin, the same thing is beginning to happen now. I was talking to the Director of Transport in Dublin when we knew we were coming back to the committee, and he said the next item they're moving on is onto camera enforcement on the bus lanes.
Was that because of the lack of resources from Garda Síochána, or?
Well, it's considered to be more efficient.
More efficient.
It's at the end of the day, it's more efficient. But I think in Dublin as well, the bus lanes that exist, other than the ones that we would be putting on the BRT, are much longer stretches of bus lane. It's much more obvious if you're in the bus lane than I think in Belfast. We have a lot more fractured sections of bus lanes where you have 100 metres here, 200 metres there. In Dublin, the quality bus corridors, and this is what we will be doing in the future, the quality bus corridors are much longer stretches of public transport priority. So I think we're moving into a different area. But the fact that the Garda Síochána would only appear maybe every third day on a route, that was more than enough to actually, the drivers, the risk of getting caught is what, and that's why we're talking about the mobile unit as being a very efficient way, rather than putting all these cameras along the routes on the various routes. So we would consider this to be by far the most efficient way of doing this.
Just a quick one. In the event in the Long Gallery, the Minister said yesterday evening about that there would be some short-term parking on the routes. It's the first time I've heard that.
The only
is that off peak times, or
we intend to operate I presume you're talking about the BRT routes.
Yeah.
We intend to operate the BRT routes 7 to 7 and be 12-hour clearways and bus lanes. I presume what he was referring to there is we will allow short-term parking. We're providing additional lay-bys in places like Ballyhackamore, on the Andersonstown Road, on the Falls Road. We're actually providing lay-bys that would be short-term parking rather than having people parking in them all day. So once again, it's a different regime we're trying to bring in, because the importance here, one of the big issues with the BRT vehicles will be not having parking, so that with the 3 doors they can get in close to the curb, for those 3 doors to be against the curb. So you can't have a car park, because with the longer vehicle they won't actually get in close to the curb.
thanks for that being.
So, thank Deputy Chair. I suppose, Kieran, I could be forgiven maybe for thinking that this is basically an income generator as opposed to actually trying to prevent people from using it, because one of the things that strikes me, we all drive around the province, we drive into our own areas, so we talk about static cameras or we talk about mobile cameras. We go into different areas and you actually get to learn there's places in each of our areas where you would slow down because you know the police are there quite frequently. So I am a wee bit concerned that this is the only option that you're looking at. There's nothing in terms of actually PCNs themselves or the likes of the Redcoats actually doing this work themselves and doing the spot checks, because I think once the message gets out there that this is enforced, then people will learn from that. But I'm not entirely convinced even from how you've arrived at the 6 locations. But what I want to ask you, Kieran, before I call, I think Cahill's next, in terms of your conversation you had with your counterpart in the South, it would be interesting maybe if you could ask him to give us a paper in terms of their experience on their current system and what they're looking at in terms of a camera system going forward, and how advanced they are in relation to that. I think it would be useful for the committee to maybe...
Well, if the committee wishes, I can arrange for you to visit the control centre in Dublin. If you're in Dublin some stage, I think some of the Sean, I think, might have been there before on some of our visits, and Brendan O'Brien, the director of traffic there, will be quite open to a wide range of issues that you may find helpful.
Yeah, well, the happy in the paper. If we could get paper in the meantime, would suffice.
Yeah, I'll request him to see if he will prepare a paper.
Okay. Cahill.
Mr. Chair, the Deputy Chair, myself and Kieran probably are the last 3 survivors of the, I think it was a mid-December visit in 2011, and I have to say I was incredibly impressed by it, because we went out at 6 in the morning and did the whole rush hour thing and did it from Artane in the north of the city to the Red Cow in the south of the city, which previously had been a total gridlock, and we went across the city in a little over, I think, about 35 minutes. And that was in transporting upwards of 1 million people both ways, twice a day, Kieran, as I recall.
The Cahill, sorry, that's without cameras.
This was at the start of it, but I have to say, since that the system I see in Dublin works very, very well. And you don't get people in that. I say that the deterrent is there with the cameras and with the dedicated, I think, motorcycle unit of the guards.
Yeah, sorry, Carl, we don't actually have the cameras there at the moment.
Yeah.
But the discussions I had with the director would lead. He was of the view that going forward, this has to be the way, because manpower is a big resource issue now for them.
But what the point I was making, Chair, in fairness, is that there was a deterrent of enforcement there, and that was part of the thing. And to turn what Dublin was mad city in terms of trying to get around it back at that time. Okay, there have been things like the tunnel and all sorts which have helped. But I suppose just the other thing, just I did want to touch on, and Sean said about the short-term parking that the Minister brought up at the NI Assembly Business Trust meeting last night. And also, one of the things that was brought up from the floor was the access for commercial deliveries. And I'm just wondering how have you factored that into it in terms of perhaps off-peak timing or some arrangement there in terms of lay-bys. Well, Hackamore, you did mention, and one of the business people last night mentioned that as well. So I'm just wondering.
I think the whole issue there is to actually look at all the parking along the route. Like, parking is obviously one of the major issues. It's always been down as one of our risks as far as the project was concerned. We are looking at very closely at putting in short-term parking that will allow for people to load and unload. I think, at the end of the day, we will be very much guided by what the business people in each area come along and say, here's the loading area that we feel you should be using for loading. This is for parking. What do you want best to get your businesses up and rational? I think that's a very important part. We've had all these public consultations for each section of the route we're doing. We're holding a public consultation section in each location. We've had about 70 people at each of these. They've come in and they've raised all these issues. So it comes down to actually each local area looking at exactly what we do in front of the shops and whatever.
So in terms of the overall system then, Chair, as I understand then, Kieran, is it that there will be local solutions there to the local issues?
Yes, obviously. Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
Ross?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions here. You mentioned that you had discussion with the police to enforce the bus lane. Were the police at any time actually enforcing the police lanes? Were there any tickets actually issued in relation to that?
Yes, the police have been enforcing the bus lanes, and they have recently, about maybe once a month approximately, we'll see them at the new bus gate on Adelaide Street. They'll come in and they'll enforce that, where people are coming straight across by the side of City Hall and down in front of the DRD offices at Clarence Court. They will come in. And they did some enforcement. When we brought Belfast on the move in initially, you know, we put a lot of, I suppose, pressure on them. Can you please come in and help us to enforce this so that we can get people used to the bus lanes? And they did come in, but it was, you know, it was done as a favour. You know, they were taking those resources away from other locations.
Was it advice and warning only, or were there tickets issued?
As far as I know, it's advice and warning only, as far as the Adelaide Street bus lane was concerned. We have put up a lot of signs there. I'm not aware, we haven't had any feedback from the police as to what they did on that recently.
I would have to declare an interest as a member of the policing board, but I mean, I really think that the possibility of using the police on a regular basis, based on the current budget, would be nil. So therefore, there has to be some form of enforcement here, and it does appear to me that the only one that can be used would be the cameras. I take it that the mobile and the arterial routes is because the arterial routes obviously need to be covered 9 in the morning, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But at certain times, it's not that big a deal, for want of a better word. Whereas your city centre ones are a continuous problem.
Yes, we have 12-hour bus lanes in the city centre, and the Castle Street, for instance, is a bus-only street all day. So there is that demand within the city centre, which is different from the bus lanes. But once the bus lanes go in on the BRT routes, there will be 12-hour bus lanes as well. So we will require to do another step up once we bring BRT in as well.
And again, any money generated is going to go back into the department.
Yes, it will go back into sustainable transport measures, and one of the areas that has been highlighted that we will use it is the maintenance of the audiovisual system that we're putting on the TransLink Metro buses at the moment.
But my last comment, Chair, would be sort of in relation to a thing you had mentioned, the red coats. I don't think they could be used because I don't think they have a power to stop. They're not a constable, so they cannot stop a moving vehicle. So I don't think they would have any authority. And the last comment, that the previous committee was up at 6 in the morning, pressed me no end.
I suppose just pick up on one of the points you made there, Kieran, in response to Ross, in terms of the revenue that we generated. But then that would be netted back out by DFP, so you wouldn't necessarily get retaining that money back to the centre.
It would be resource. So we,
Resource only.
yeah, could retain it.
So the other thing that's puzzling me slightly about all of this, and I mean, we touched on it last night in terms of the BRT next door, was you actually have to identify the problem, but in terms of the bus service themselves, in terms of the passenger charter, the target is 95%, target which they're meeting. So that indicates that there's actually not as big a problem as, you know, you could, I mean, hopefully I'm forgiven for thinking that this is just purely for actually creating a revenue stream for DRD, because if TransLink or the bus operators are operating at 95% in terms of their efficiencies, so we're talking about 5%, but this really does seem like a sledgehammer to crack a nut in terms of coming in with the big heavy arm here, and really, if I look at the slides, you're going to pains actually show how much revenue you're going to try and make from it as well. So the operators are in Belfast. The operators are actually not indicating that there's a particularly big problem for them.
Yeah, it's quite germane you actually said that, Chairman, because Damien Bannon, who works at TransLink, they hold focus groups, and on, I think, Monday of this week, or Friday last week, I'm not too sure which, they held a focus group for Metro users, and one of their major complaints was the lack of enforcement along the routes. So I can share that, the results of that focus group.
You share that, Kieran, but I'm sharing with you their own results in terms of their target they set at 95 or 96%, which they're achieving. So we're talking about all the buses in Belfast, less than 4% are not achieving it on time. Sorry, the next member's Joe.
Yeah, Chairman, thanks. I work on the presentation. I still have an open mind on the long-term viability of it. But in relation to traffic management, what are the expected benefits from traffic management? Or is it quite simply that we have too many private vehicles coming into Belfast City Centre and the congestion is such that it's causing mayhem for the business community?
I'm not quite sure, Joe, how the two things relate, but as far as, you know, I suppose what we're trying to do is prevent people using the bus lanes illegally.
Yeah.
And I suppose, as well as that, the fact that we have a lot more cyclists now on the bus lanes the more people we can actually keep out of them, the better. The more car drivers we can keep out of them, the better. From a purely traffic management point of view, people will take a chance on using the bus lane if they think it's not being enforced. I think that's just human nature. So from our point of view, we have a traffic management system in place, particularly Belfast on the Move now, which has had major benefits in improving the city centre for public transport, pedestrians and cyclists, and we're trying to maintain that. And I suppose when you look at Castle Street and Adelaide Street, where we've actually made major changes to how those streets operate, giving more space for the pedestrians. At the end of the day, all car drivers are pedestrians as they walk around the city. I think that's the important thing, that we are looking at maintaining a reasonable level of traffic coming into the city, doing business in the city, but we're trying to give priority for the other modes. And it's important that we enforce the bus lanes as part of that.
Okay, Chairman. I'm generally in favour of having some new methodology to try and make sure we lessen these violations, and if we can reduce accidents, particularly for cyclists and pedestrians. Yes, sir.
Okay, David?
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, some 500 to 700,000 of income against 100 to 150,000 of costs. How did you arrive at those figures?
If you take the charges generated by, we are estimating that 15,000 PCNs will be issued on a yearly basis after the system has been installed.
And how did you arrive at that figure?
We looked at, from the 2013 survey, we identified what is the level of misuse of the bus lanes, both in the city centre and on the arterial routes. So we have an idea of what the level of abuse or misuse is now. We looked at experience.
Sorry, what you're saying is, as of now, it's 15,000 more or less offenders?
No, I think if you can, the survey identified, it was looking at where we experienced on an average day, those 15 cameras identified nearly 3,000 offences in one day. That's what the survey was telling us. We used that information to identify pro rata, what's that likely to be over a year. When we bring in cameras, we spoke to colleagues across the water as to what were their experiences of bringing in cameras. We would expect that that level of abuse would reduce by 95% after about 6 months. And it's on that basis that we've identified or estimated 15,000 PCNs. Taking the 15,000 PCNs, what is the lovely level of money being generated by the PCNs? It depends on how many of those PCNs are upheld, how many of those are paid within 14 days, how many are paid within 28 days. And that's where we got the range between 500 and 700,000.
If I may just be allowed, Chairman, to, as I usually do, I'm not knocking what you're talking about. I'm a bit worried about all this thing having to be allied with cyclists, and you know my opinion on that well enough. But this 15,000 offenders is what they will be. In the interests of the potential offender, i.e. me, I probably know about it because I'm on this committee, what type of public awareness campaign will you be driving to inform the unsuspecting offender or motorist that you're likely to be hit with a £90 fine and the reason why? Is there a campaign of that nature built into it?
There is a proposal, subject to discussions today obviously, that prior to introducing the cameras in 2015, that we would go out and engage with the various stakeholders, including the public, to inform them. That would be through information on the website, it would be through media articles, interviews, and would also be through information posted on the bus routes, both in the city centre and on the arterial routes.
How much is that going to cost?
The cost, there's not a budget for an advertisement campaign. The media stuff would be through interviews with officials and with the Minister, and therefore...
I understand that, so you're hoping that somebody will pick it up in the public interest. It's in the public interest that this committee would act. So I wonder, and I know money's very, very tight, it does seem to me, Chairman, that this could be
launched unsuspectingly onto many, many people, motorists. And I would encourage somebody to look at some kind of, I mean, we advertise about everything else which is bad for you. A £90 fine in my book is bad for you. And I'd like to just maybe see if you could look at some kind of awareness campaign that maybe somebody's paying for. Get TransLink to pay for it, they have plenty of money. That we could maybe introduce just to cover, because I'm horrified to think that, and I appreciate all your figures, Peter, I'm horrified to think that 15,000 people are going to wander into these lanes and get hit. I'm just horrified at that, and I know that's not the end of it. And I'm just asking for a wee bit of protection if you could think about it.
David, we will be using all the resources we have available. Obviously, resources are quite tight at the moment, but we would obviously, the press office, there will be interviews, because this will be, when we do our briefing from the Minister, we said this is likely to draw public attention from the papers and whatever. So we will use that, but we also will put up signs that will advertise to people on the routes that the bus lanes are now being enforced. And I think, the way the cameras will be set up, it won't be people that will wander into the bus lanes if there's somebody turning right or whatever. It will be people driving cars that go in there deliberately. That's what we're targeting. It's not the person that strays in. That's not the intention. This is to catch the
That person will be caught anyhow.
Yeah, this is to catch the serious.
Whatever their intention, that person will be caught. If they make a mistake, there's no 3 strikes and you're out. It's 1 strike and you're out here.
Yeah, but people have to look at what the signs on any road, any bus lanes are, and obey those signs. So that.
But I've made my point, Chairman, about perhaps some public awareness campaign that actually gets to the public.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And the problem, thanks, David. The problem with the point that David's raising is that if we actually go ahead today and put this through, the public awareness campaign will come out after
Indeed.
the installation of the cameras. But Peter, can I take you back to your figures in response to David? Can you just talk me through your figures again?
For the 15,000 PCs?
Yes.
Okay.
David, I think you should listen to this.
I will.
It's based on the level of misuse at this minute in time. From a 2013 survey, we looked at both in the city centre and the arterial routes to identify what is an estimate of the misuse of bus lanes at this minute in time.
Yes.
We then spoke to colleagues across the water who have installed cameras and what their
Can you
experience
give me some numbers again?
of.
You had some statistics?
3,000 a day.
Oh, sorry.
3,000
The survey from 2013, okay, was taken over a week. On the average day, so over 5 days, it was averaged. There were nearly 3,000 recorded incidents
Per day?
Per day.
Yes.
At this minute in time.
That was over 15 sites,
That was over 15 sites.
not over 6.
Not over 6.
And of 6 of the sites that you didn't survey, so you've only the stats for 3 sites.
No. What we're looking at, 15
Sorry, just correct me if I'm wrong. You have 6 sites planned, you have stats for 3 sites. But your calculations are based on 15 sites.
No, the calculations were based on, there were 15 sites identified, 3 in the city centre and 12 on the arterial routes. So from the city centre, we have an idea of the level of misuse on the city centre, and we use that figure to project what are the level of PCNs likely to be generated from the cameras in the city centre. And likewise, we use the figures from the arterial routes to say what is the likely number of PCNs generated by one mobile unit on the arterial routes.
Right. So let's talk about the stats you have in terms of the 6 sites we're talking about the cameras. Over a week, of the 3 areas that you actually did survey, and so we'll have to leave aside the 3 that you didn't survey, you have less than 2,000 detections in a week, not a day. In Castle Street, you had 487 for the week, May Street 750, and Oxford Street 844. Circa 2,000 that would be.
Those incidents are per day, not so that's the average daily level of infringement at those 3 sites in that week in 2013.
but it doesn't take us to 15,000, even if we multiply it out the other three that you haven't surveyed. So if we get 2,000 per day,
2,000 per day?
are you saying these figures are per day or per week?
Per day.
Per day.
Sorry, Chairman, if I think...
12,000 a week, it's
Sorry, I think...
600,000 a year.
Yeah, I think...
They're budgeting on 15.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here, Chairman, we've estimated we'd have about 600,000 violations that would take place at the moment per year.
On 15 sites?
On right throughout the system, on the 15 sites. What we're saying is, bring in the cameras, there'll be a dramatic drop, which has been seen in every city, and should drop down to somewhere about 85–90% of those should go away. And what we're saying is, of the remainder, those 15,000, that's what we would expect to generate throughout the year. So there is a high overall figure there that will drop dramatically. Then we will get a much lower level of infringements, and we expect to catch, for want of a better word, about 15,000 of those a year.
A year?
Yeah.
So, in terms of the presentation, you talk about I mean, even at David's point, it was £700,000 you anticipated to generate every year.
Well, that may drop down if drivers behave much better, if driver behaviour improves.
And what you're wanting us to suggest today, Kieran, I mean, we would assume that drivers will behave once they know the enforcement's working, but we're working on a baseline at the moment between 500 and 700,000 based on today's practices. Going forward, given in terms of your own admission, those numbers will drop, but the operating costs between 100 and 150,000.
Yeah, the operating costs...
So what you haven't factored in is actually where we're going to be in year 2, 3 or 4. And what we could have is a service actually going to cost us money as opposed to saving money.
No, that's actually factored in. The 15,000 is that's what we expect will happen in maybe 2 years' time, 3 years' time. And we also will then have the option to actually move those cameras to other locations.
If I may be excused, Chairman, I'm sorry, I have some visitors here today, but thank you very much, but there's still a wee bit of work on this. If I may.
Chair, I want to clarify something before David leaves. David made the comment, one strike and you're out. That's not the case, as far as I understand. There's a warning for the first offence.
Only in the period when we're bringing in, we're going to phase the operation of the system over a couple of months.
What's the drop rate of
But I want to check how long this warning will be for.
So, sorry, just clarify that again, Kieran.
We're phasing the introduction of the cameras so that people will get used to them. This is another way of bringing it in slowly, so that the first, if you get caught in that phase-in period, which can be six weeks to 2 months, if you get caught during that once, you'll get a warning letter. If you get caught a second time, you'll get a fine because you're obviously...
Before I call Chris in, just from my own mind, so you looked at the static cameras. Did you ever look, I mean, did you cost out what it would cost in terms of actually fitting the cameras to the buses to do the same job?
Yeah, the London, Transport for London used to have cameras on their buses, and the cost of, they've dropped that system because the technology that's there at the moment, we're considering this as well for the BRT vehicles, and we're looking at technologies. The technology isn't great at the moment. The cost of it would be huge of outfitting 260 odd buses, the Metro bus services. You have to put cameras in each of the buses. As well as that, you have to have very accurate information that the bus knows exactly where it is when it takes the photograph. This is where Transport for London ran into quite a few issues. Where exactly is the bus catching the offence on the camera in front of it? Now, it proved to be very effective because people stayed out of the bus lane because of the risk of getting caught with a red bus coming along with a camera in it. We've been looking at the latest technology as far as that's concerned. We've been talking to colleagues in Transport for London as far as the BRT is concerned, and we're not sure that this is what we will go forward with. So the technology isn't quite good enough at the moment, and it is very expensive to fit every camera, fit all the buses with cameras, and putting the cameras on the buses creates its own issues as to how you actually get that technology to sit and be operated efficiently, because it's a moving on a bus that's jerking around all the time. So there are a lot of issues with putting enforcement cameras in buses.
Okay, Chris, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. As all-party Group 1 Cycling Chair, you'll probably not be surprised to hear that I do believe fundamental change in how we share and use our roads is essential and will be a positive thing. I think anything that improves traffic flow, public transport, sustainable transport, active travel should be supported. But I do agree with David that implementation is how it is implemented is going to be vitally important, and I'm glad we've had some clarification in relation to that. I think it'll be vital that you continue to explain the scale of the problem as it exists, and I think some of the stats here are saying 50% vehicles in bus lanes are travelling illegally, 70% illegal use on Upper Newton Arch Road, 80% illegal use on Ormeau Road shows that there is a problem, but I think it's important that you sell the benefits of addressing the problem as best as possible as well. In terms of implementation, some of these questions have been asked, but how can you say again how you will ensure that you have and you will select locations in a fair manner?
We intend to have a rota of bus lanes that the cameras, obviously fixed cameras are fixed, but the roving vehicles, shall we call it, that will have a rota of going around different bus lanes. It won't simply hit the Ormeau Road every day. It'll hit the Ormeau Road maybe once every 9 days or once every 7 days, whatever the rota we work out with NSL in the future as to how that will operate. So, and then obviously if there's some certain locations that are giving a lot of problems, then we can focus the vehicle on that.
Okay. I think phased introduction is a creative idea as well. I do think that there are some genuine road users who just aren't fully aware of rules and regulations around the bus lanes at the moment. And as I say, I think this needs to be part of a wider package. Can I ask briefly, Chair, how the imminent taxis and bus lanes issues is going to factor into addressing this, and indeed whether, if bus lanes or enforcement is to be increased and improved, whether there's any plans to examine cycle lane enforcement as well then?
As far as I'm aware, we've no plans to examine cycle lane enforcement, but obviously the conference tomorrow might be your chance to raise that issue with the Minister.
Okay. What about the issue in terms, there seems to be some concern in terms of specific numbers of increased taxis that may be in the bus lanes in the near future, how that figures into what you're trying to do with this proposal?
Yeah, I suppose as far as the department is concerned, DOE are the licensing authority for the taxis, and we have to deal with whatever comes out of that. My own views as far as taxis are concerned, in Dublin we have a huge number of taxis in the bus lanes. They operate pretty okay, but you know there are different. We have a single type of taxi. In Belfast we have obviously the permitted taxis and then the ones that are not allowed to pick up. So there are different standards of types of taxis in Belfast, and I think that issue has to be addressed before we can.
I think that, Chair, that puts into perspective the importance of proper use of bus lanes. However, given the amount of users that we are trying to utilise through the bus lanes, it's important that they're used in the way we plan for them to be used then. Thanks, Chair.
Of course, that also opens up another problem for you, because once the taxis are allowed to use that, they will be detected with cameras. So in terms of the administration of that's going to be more resourceful, no?
What we intend to have is a white list of number plates that once you're permitted usage of the bus lane, then you won't get a fine.
Okay. I think all members are covered, so thank you for the presentation. And,
thank you very much, Chairman.
okay, thank you.
Members.
Members, there's two SL1s to agree in relation to this issue. So we can refer members to page 165 of their pack.
Sorry, what page did you say, Chair?
Sorry, page 165.
Chair, is this for decisions today on this issue?
Well, yes, for members' information, for those that are new to the committee, these two proposed pieces of draft subordinate legislation did come to the committee in June, and as normal, the chair would have put the question as to whether members were content with the merits of the policy. At that time, by majority, members were opposed to the merits of the policy on the basis that they required further clarification, which is why the department have come back again today. The two pieces of proposed subordinate legislation are again before committee today as part of this process, and it's for members to decide whether they're in favour of the policy merits or whether they require further clarification in respect to any of the discussions that we've gone on here today.
My only concern going forward is that, and I mean, this is the first time I've been involved in this particular part of the process. I agree with the point you made earlier, Chris, in terms of we do have to get a system to make it safer. I mean, I think I don't think anybody could disagree with that. My only concern is that I don't think, even by today, we didn't get much of an insight in terms of what the other options were or how well that was explored. I mean, this seems to be the department's only show in town, and they're not really forthcoming with some of the other stuff. And I mean, in Kieran's own admission, the transport in London did have the cameras in the buses, as one example. He's suggesting they may be looking away from that, but it must have been successful for them for a number of years. But it's useful to drill into the numbers and statistics in terms of actually how that would have done. The other thing that strikes me about this is, and I mean, we're all au fait with social media, and there's websites out there, there's sites out there actually telling you where traffic enforcement's at on a particular day. So you can imagine, in terms of your point, Chris, in terms of the arterial routes where actually the biggest contraventions are actually happening, whenever the people travelling those areas find that it's Normal Road, they'll be telling everybody else, well, it's actually okay to use the bus lanes everywhere else because the traffic cameras in Normal Road today. You know, so I actually think there's still problems with it, but it's up to the members. Chris, I know you indicated you want to speak.
Just point of clarification, Chair, the department need a decision from us to proceed with these proposals?
The next stage, if members were content with this, the next stage would be for the department to bring the statutory rule. The statutory rule is subject to negative resolution. I mean, it will come before committee to have the question put as to whether they either support or object it. It is subject to negative resolution.
So this is an in-principle response at this stage they're looking for, yeah?
They're looking to, that committee are content with the merits of the policy.
Right.
Yeah, I think in fairness, Chair, we are okay with
the principle, yeah.
The principle, yeah. So there's no safeguards there.
No, that's fair enough.
So
Yeah, I mean, I've expressed my support for the principle of the proposal.
SL1, the penalty charges prescribed devices regulations Northern Ireland 2014. Are the members content with the merits of the policy proposal?
Agreed.
Agreed, okay. SL1, the penalty charges additional contraventions regulations Northern Ireland 2014. And are the members content with the merits of that policy proposal?
Agreed.
Okay.
Sorry to come in again, but I think that it's been agreed that what is absolutely essential is the implementation and communication and public awareness of any introduction of such a proposal. I think that is an area where maybe more robust detail is needed and maybe more creative thinking about how elected representatives and other organisations can be used to communicate any changes that would be forthcoming.
I think your point's useful, but I suppose in response to that, there has been no consultation. So if we're at the stage, I think we've agreed in principle in terms of the policy direction. I don't think we're tied down in terms of entirely the technology. I think we're agreeing in principle. But I think, so taking your point, Chris, I mean, hopefully the department detect that there's maybe some reservations from some of us in this, and they may go and maybe fulfil some of the questions that some of us want to pose. But consultation is important. But it does. I do detect that they want to just push on with this. This is the only show in town, and let's roll this out. So,
well, Chair, you're right. I think you're right. They've given specific timescales clearly in mind there. You know, so I think it would be naive or head in the sand from us to think that there is not specific timescales in mind here in terms of fairly soon implementation. So I think we need to stay on top of it if we have concerns in terms of implementation.
Just to advise members or re-emphasise what the department has said, that they want to introduce the statutory rule this month with a view to it coming into place in 2015. Now, as Mr O'Hashin has said, there are other safeguards in respect of that. The first is that the statutory rule must come to the committee for their support. If at that stage members feel that there hasn't been, for example, sufficient consultation or communication of it, members do have, understanding orders, the opportunity to lay a prayer of annulment in respect of it and bring it to the chamber.
I think the department has provided us with a significant amount of detail. I don't think that could be disputed, in fairness to it.
In terms of consultation, I think, that will take it up with the point you had made earlier, and I think that is key to it all. Agenda item number 7, members, off-street parking functions of district councils bill. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Right, page 169. Can advise members that they have been provided with a draft forward. Sorry, that moved on. Sorry. Do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, it's just as the chair was indicating there, members have agreed at the last meeting that they would endeavour to meet with the Minister's requirement to have the off-street parking bill processed within the 30 days, subject to them retaining the right to seek an extension if the need arises. Now, as yet, the department haven't responded in respect of that. From a procedural perspective, if the department wanted to go for accelerated passage, they would have to put the motion on Monday because it has to be done before the second stage. So I'm making a big assumption here that they're content with that. That leaves us with a very, very tight programme in respect of it, as you'll see from the forward work plan. We, as approved by committee, we have gone out to consultation. The signposts were placed in the local press on Monday. We have written to the shadow councils that responded to the departmental consultation with regards to seeking their opinion as to whether they believe that they've had sufficient clarification from the department in respect of the transfer of functions. And we're in touch with NILGA and another couple of organisations that have sought or that are going to submit written submissions. But as I say, we're marking out November after the recess to cover the oral evidence sessions in this. That may require, depending on the number of people the committee want to call for oral evidence, it may require us doing all-day sessions. And unfortunately, because of the roof project and committees being put onto the 8 committees on a Wednesday with only 4 rooms, they will necessarily have to be off-site.
And I suppose that brings forward challenge. But one of the other things, so remember, we're all furnished with the draft forward work programme in relation to the particular bill. One of the things we did discuss, and I think it was David McNary raised the point, and I certainly supported him on that particular issue, that we would possibly have to make an amendment in relation to one aspect. We've asked the committee, we've asked the department in relation to the ownership and once the assets transfer, that the councils actually can't necessarily sell that on. So again, in terms of that, we did a response fairly soon from the department.
Well, just on that, Chair, myself and the assistant clerk are going to be meeting with the department tomorrow afternoon, just to put that very point to the officials and to seek the department's commitment to see whether they want to bring forward the amendment or whether the committee will bring forward that amendment.
Chairman, sorry, Dylan first then.
Chair, I think could we also look at the possibility of asking the department to do an amendment in respect of the regulations? You'll be aware there was a request from NILGA and also Belfast City Council to consider the regulations which reside within DRD. NILGA have asked that the council should have like a consultative role in terms of those regulations. And whilst the department confirmed last week that they would have, could we look at the possibility of getting the bill amended to include that, you know, as in the bill?
Well, that will be something for members to discuss in the committee stage. As I say, we've written to all the organisations that have submitted the consultation responses, and essentially have asked them that any of the issues that they raised, we've asked them, are you content that the department has addressed this? And until such times as we get those responses in, I think it's the 31st of October is the closing date in respect of written submissions. So until such times, it would be difficult to see whether an amendment would be required or not. But members can address amendments to it if they so wish or during committee stage.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, Chairman, just on that issue about restrictions on the future use of car parks that would be transferred to councils, most of the councils have said that they don't want restrictions. And certainly the Ilga, Commentary don't want those sort of restrictions. I think it would be not very advisable for us to dictate in relation to what a district council should do with the park when it gets it.
Well, I think the consensus was the day last day, Joe, at the end of the day, we're actually transferring a valuable asset.
Yes,
and there's a purpose actually in them actually having the asset. I don't think it would be, well, I mean, maybe I read the meeting wrong the last day, but to transfer something to council, for them to turn around, so you're gifting something that's worth considerable amounts of money, for councils to turn around with their own plans and do whatever they wish with that. That may mean that they actually remove the car parking for the use in that particular area for another use. So at the very least, we should be insisting that if they dispose of the asset, that they provide sufficient parking to make up for whatever's been taken away. But other than that, I actually don't know why we would be transferring. There seems to be an opinion from some of the councils, this is great, we're getting something for nothing, we can do what we want with it. At the end of the day, what's the purpose of transferring the car park to actually benefit an area if they're actually going to dispose of it?
The only thing I would say, John, is the local democratic organisation, the council, should have some jurisdiction itself over its decision-making regarding the future use. I would have thought that no council would want to get rid of, sell a car park and create less car parking in their area.
Well, then they should have no objection to us putting a caveat in terms of their disposal.
Chair, I think, I mean, it was something I agree with, that the council have been given this asset and really they should retain it for a set period. We all know what councils and arguments are in relation to the number of car parks. Omagh being a prime example, a row over whether they should have more car parks or not. But if they're going to remove it as a car park, there must be some sort of penalty that they either replace it with another car park somewhere else or along those lines. I think that they have the right, once they get it, to do what they want to do with charges and everything else. That's up to them. But it's being gifted as a car park. And I do believe that we should put a restriction on it for 5 years or whatever. That would be my own opinion, Joe.
Yes, I can see the rationale for having some sort of condition that if they were to consider disposing of a car park, that they would have to have alternative car parking in place.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're talking about, Joe. As opposed to, we're not tying them forever. I mean, if you take on the edge of a town where there's in terms of economic development in a particular area, that the car park is strategic in terms of getting that delivered, that they go ahead and dispose of that. But they would dispose of that in the caveat that they're actually going to replace it somewhere else convenient, that or additional.
Yeah.
Chair, I think in fairness that the clarity in terms of is the set period is the issue, because in some cases it was the councils who initially created the car parks, and they wouldn't want to have a restriction necessarily on them, whereby if they're looking at some future development, particularly of town centres, whereby the prime site is a car park, whereas the actual, perhaps the commercial end of it has moved elsewhere within that town. Now, that has happened in a number of towns that I would be aware of. So I think that there should be an option there whereby councils and respective democratic mandate they have are allowed to dispose of it for the purpose that they wish, but with the caveat that the additional stuff is.
You see, I mean, personally speaking, I wouldn't even buy into a time limit. I would be the suggestion that the department has transferred them an asset, which is a valuable asset. They're gifting it to them for their use. They can set their own charges. They can do what they wish in terms of that. However, if they want to dispose of it for economic development or for whatever use that democratic elected council wants to do, that's fine. but provide something else in an area. That's the caveat that we need to be sure.
And that's
is
all.
tied in there.
That's all and well in terms of the definition of a car park, because there may be a multitude of other uses. At which points that a council may wish to use that space within the town,
You know
such
what?
as say a Christmas market or.
I'm hearing some councillors complaining about it already, that they're hearing that this committee are suggesting that it's our council, we should be allowed to do what we want. We have to also protect. I mean, some of the councils, unfortunately, are not necessarily run by councillors, they're run by officials. And
Where does that happen?
so officials may have their own ideas in terms of how they want to drive and shape particular areas, but I think we need to protect the ratepayers as well and provide a car park and make sure that the councils actually continue to provide parking for them in that area. We're getting off slightly in terms of that, but in terms of the Forward Work Programme, there's been an advertisement asking for views in relation to the bill, and that appeared on the press on Monday the 13th. Okay. So our members reasonably content then in terms of the Forward Work Programme has been laid out by Paul. Okay. Yeah. Agenda item number 8 is an SL1 for the A3 Portadown Road, Rich Hill. It's an abandonment order, Northern Ireland 2014. I refer members to page 173 of their pack. If members have that, are the members content with the merits of the policy proposal?
Content, great.
Agreed, okay. Agenda item number 9, supporting legislation not subject to assembly procedure. I refer members to page 177 of their pack. And can I ask members to note that the roads classification order, Northern Ireland 2014, and the weighting restrictions, Lurgan number 2 order, amendment number 2, Northern Ireland 2014. Okay, and that's just for noting. Any other business? So if there's no further business, then the next.
Can I just ask a quick question, Chair? What is the current status of the committee in barring the benefits of cycling?
Committee took a decision the first meeting back after the summer recess. Member will be aware that the department issued their strategy out to consultation during the summer period. On the back of that, members decided to defer publication of the report until such times as they were able to see the finalised strategy following the consultation. That's due to be before committee on the 10th of December.
Chair, is that not quite a while away? Is there? I know I wasn't part of the decision to decide to defer publication, but is the report pretty much complete?
The report is pretty much complete. Obviously, references to at that time the absence of a strategy were fairly prominent. Certainly, members did express some concerns, and indeed the department did concede that the bicycle strategy was more of a statement of intent rather than a strategy. And I think members were content that it would be appropriate to wait until the strategy was available.
Would the report not help inform the strategy, Chair?
Sorry.
Would the report not help inform the work towards the strategy? I know we're losing members here.
We're in court.
In terms of my decision, we're okay to discuss.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is it possible? I know.
Well, you're asking me, Chris. I mean, I suppose I actually wasn't part of that discussion
Yeah.
there because it's only my 4th or 5th meeting. So,
is it worth reconsidering, given some of the new membership, or?
Am I right in thinking that I think the public consultation on the bicycle strategy ends around the 21st of November, and I think we're in a review that we would let that process conclude, just in case there's issues that might arise which may be relevant to the cycling inquiry. So we kind of shelved it until.
Well, I mean, my understanding was that was the basis of the members' decision, was to see if any further issues arose out of it.
It was, in fairness, Paul, been parked as such.
It was, yeah.
We parked it until after.
That was the thinking behind it.
so you're only in another 4 weeks, Chris.
Well, we'd be kind of doing the same thing, but you know, 'cause I suppose if they're engaged in the public consultation exercise and we're doing an inquiry parallel, you're almost at the same type of, doing a similar type of role, aren't you? If we're doing the same
There were concerns, members did express concerns at the meeting that, you know, if the report came out in advance of the consultation, that really the departmental response would be, we'll wait until the consultation comes out, or wait and see what the consultation is going to say. And I think, in fairness, members decided that they would prefer to wait until such times as the consultation was completed before making their minds up. With regards to the members' answer or request or question regarding whether they could review that decision again, absolutely. For members to...
That's helpful, Chair. So just to check I understand. So the approach is to consider some of the outcomes of the consultation in order to inform in a robust way the report that would come forward and the recommendations that would be made. And it's felt that the proximity to that consultation being completed is close enough that it could be considered, and then the report would be forthcoming pretty soon thereafter.
It may well be that, whenever the final strategy does come forward, that members may feel that there are still gaps in respect of it.
When are we expecting the publication of the strategy, though?
10th of December. It'll be at the meeting of the 10th of December.
Apologies, Chris, I wasn't up to speed because...
I just think there's a few of us, so it's helpful for Clark to set that out for us. So do we have a timescale in mind as to when the inquiry report would be published after the 10th of December then? Because you're pretty close to Christmas then, obviously.
Well, that would be the last meeting before the Christmas recess. The intention would be, provided the department met the deadlines with regards to getting papers to the committee for that meeting, that we could make the assessment then and draft up the final report and consider the draft report at the meeting of the 10th of December.
I'm a bit undecided as to whether it's better to publish recommendations in order to try and influence the strategy, or why wait until after the strategy is published to make recommendations?
In the case that the members believe that there are gaps within the strategy, that they could make recommendations in respect of.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. And the Chair, you may have already announced, but there is a cycling conference tomorrow.
That's right, I forgot.
In Spars. The department is leading, so members want to attend.
A number of members have indicated that they will be in attendance, as will the committee support team.
No problem.
Thanks for that.
Good job.
We actually omitted that at the start, and I intend to go myself. Members, the next meeting is scheduled for at 10 a.m. in room 21 Parliament Buildings on Wednesday, 22nd, 2014. Meeting's closed.
The Northern Ireland Assembly